You know what, Dan? We've known each other for several years now. The very least I can do is take you out for dinner.
Oh, that's really nice of you, Satsu. You really don't have to, you know. So where are we going?
Well, seeing as our last episode together was on Mass Effect, I thought we could go to this new space-themed restaurant that a friend of mine recommended to me. You're absolutely going to love it. It's called the USG Tempura.
Whoa. What did you just say, Satsu?
Admittedly, their lighting's a bit dim, their tables are broken, and their waiters are, cut in half. But you know what? Some people just really love a theme.
Right, I need you to think really carefully now. Are you sure a friend recommended this place to you?
Yeah. Well, a friend of a friend and their roommate's friend was like, oh, my friend Nicole, she likes bread, something, USG Tempura.
Are you sure they didn't say Ishimura?
Tempura, Ishimura, what's the difference?
Right, let me put it this way. Do you like flesh-tearing aliens?
No.
Jump scares?
No.
Space cults and the never-ending trauma of losing those you love in the eternal vacuum of space.
Ah, that explains the 1-star reviews.
Satsu, you're taking us to the dead spaceship, you crazy red panda. And they didn't say Nicole likes bread, they said she... oh my lord.
Wanna look around for a bit and find out what happened here?
Yeah, screw it, why not? Welcome to Chatsunami.
Hello everybody and welcome to this spooky episode of Chatsunami. My name's Satsunami and joining me aboard the USG, well, I don't want to say USG Chatsunami, but let's face it, it's going down anyway, is none other than the one and only Dan from Casting Views. Dan, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back on, but I just want to clear something. Is there no dinner now then?
No, sadly not.
Satsu.
I mean, I was gonna, but you know, the dead bodies everywhere and the upturned furniture. And you know, this place needs a lick of paint, I'm gonna be honest. So that would put me off. I don't know about you, but bad interior decorating, no, puts me off for life. But apart from that, how are you doing tonight?
No, really good, thank you, really good. Yeah, it's been a week and the weather, I mean, that British thing, right, but the weather at the moment is absolutely atrocious. So it's just keeping an eye whether I'm driving to work or rowing to work at the moment.
I mean, to be honest, living in Scotland myself, and you're probably the same down there in England, but my God, the weather does not know what it wants to be.
Yeah.
Some days, absolutely scorching sunshine, lots of people taking their tops off and being like, oh yeah, let's go, taps off weather. And then literally the next day, they are frozen still because it is absolutely Baltic. So you're like, what do you want from me? Honestly, I feel like I should be dancing in my garden to bring in the good weather, but my neighbours have actually called the police once or twice about that, so maybe it's because I didn't have a shirt on, to be fair, but that's a story for another day. Speaking of unspeakable horrors and great segues, of course, today we are taking it into spooky territory. I think this is probably our first spooky episode together, isn't it?
Oh, it definitely is, yeah.
Because today we are indeed going to be focusing on the 2023 remake, which I cannot believe it's that late on, the remake of the incredible Dead Space, which, am I right in saying that came out in 2007?
I think it might have been 2008, I think, yeah. It was funny what you're saying about you thought it was earlier. We were saying just before we started recording, I thought the remake was this year. I played it a couple of months ago, I think, but yeah, I actually thought it was this year.
Yeah, and then you bullied me into playing it as well.
Well, I hold on, I suggested you play it, and then I hadn't even played it, and I didn't play it for months after I got you to play it. That's the funny thing. It's great. I love suggesting games to you. It's brilliant.
Oh, no, it actually is, because to be honest, when you suggest a game to me or vice versa, you know for a fact it's going to end up as content down the pipeline. Even after I played it, I was like, you know what would be really cool? If we did an episode in this, we could do it for Halloween and everything. That was like, what, April, May time, maybe?
Yeah, it must have been something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and of course we both went away, we played it, absolutely loved it, and then, well, spoilers for the episode, but yeah, this is an absolutely fantastic remake. overall it was a fantastic game series, especially, as you were saying, 2008, this game initially came out. It took the gaming scene by storm in terms of really how different it was. But going back to you for a second, what were your experiences with this back in 2008? Did you play it at that time?
I'm going to say I probably didn't play it on release. And the reason why is funny, I was talking to Joey of the Game Club pod last night about this, that I'm not really, well, I was going to say I'm not really a scary game player, but I'm not really a horror / gory game player. So games like that, I tend not to pay full price for. So I think I would have played this probably a couple of years later, possibly even when the second game was out. I think I picked this up then. So yeah, I'm probably looking at around 2010, maybe 2011 when I eventually got around to playing this. But I remember wishing I played it sooner because, well, we'll come on to obviously sort of comparison, but even back then, I think it was just such a great game to play.
Oh no, absolutely. Because I have to say, I think I was in a similar boat. For anyone who has been listening for a while, you'll know I am a massive scaredy cat when it comes to these kind of games. I am not a big fan of horror games, but over time I'm getting more desensitized. So on Twitch, I remember I was playing games like Outlast, Little Nightmares, Condemned Criminal Origins. Good games, I would recommend them, but it's not really something I look out for, you know, like your Silent Hills, Resident Evils. I say that, although you and I both played Still Wakes the Deep. Oh, that was absolutely fantastic, that game.
You see, that's the thing, you mentioned two games there, right? Still Wakes the Deep and also Silent Hill. Now, while especially Silent Hill is in the horror genre, it's more of a game that puts you on edge, I think, and I want to say psychological, and those are the games I prefer more. Even films, I really don't like gory films, but the ones that play with your mind, I'm all in for those, you know?
No, absolutely, because with Dead Space, I must have played this in, I want to say 2012, 2013, and the reason I remember so vividly is because I remember an old flatmate at university, and we played it around October time, and he was saying, hey, do you want to play a scary game? And I was like, Jigsaw, what you doing living with me? For legal reasons, that's a joke, but he said, do you want to play a scary game together? I'm like, yeah, sure, what do you want to play? And we both had a copy of Dead Space, and I think it might have been in a Humble Bundle. Maybe that's why I have it. I've got no idea. I was actually looking through the scary games I've got. Turns out I've also got Silent Hill 4. I don't know why, because I never bought it, so it must have been out a Humble Bundle pack. But we both played the game together on our own separate PCs, and we were trying to beat one another in terms of how far we could get. So we turned off the lights, we played it, we jumped out our skins, and we only got half an hour to an hour into the game, but it felt like forever actually going through the game, and you know, you were on the edge of your seat and everything. So even back then, this game was so impactful, and the graphics as well were absolutely stunning for the time. But compared to the remake, that's obviously not the case, but that is something we'll of course jump into. But yeah, it is an absolutely iconic game. Do you remember the advertising around that time between the first game and the second game?
Do you know what? I don't actually, no.
So the first game, it was a lot more subdued advertising. You know, they would say, oh, it's a horror game and everything. Oh, look at the scary gribblies. But it got such a reputation from that they ran an ad campaign where they were saying, oh, this game, at least for the second game, they said the game is so gory that your mum wouldn't want you to play it. And they had all these mothers' reactions to the game, like, oh, I wouldn't let my son play that, etc. It was so weird. And I think by the time they got to the third game, their reputation kind of ran away from them. Then, of course, by the time we get to the remake in 2023, it really drew players back to the roots of what made Dead Space so iconic in the first place, without the microtransactions, the EA getting a grubby paws and everything, or slimy scythe arms, I suppose.
You mentioned EA, and well, if we were going to talk about the ups and downs, the ups, the downs, the ups, the more downs, then the ups again of them. I mean, there was that period of time here. So, you know, I know it was for Mass Effect, it was Microsoft Studios for the first game, but then eventually I think they were publishers for that. Then you've obviously got the Dead Space games. So they were there for these moments of great gaming experiences.
Yeah, and then they got voted the worst company in the world 2 years
These
in a row.
things never last for long, right?
No, yeah. Drop in the water for them. Any publicity is good publicity, as they say. But
yeah.
And of course, it's a shame because I want to address the necromorph elephant in the room, which looks absolutely absolutely terrifying, but Dead Space 2 was supposed to be remade, and unfortunately that got canned for some reason because this game didn't sell well, and I have no idea how, because, and again we'll get into it in a minute, but it was just such an impactful game.
Yeah, and on that, I just want to say, I was reading before we jumped on, and the fact is that, the sales were low, and apparently lower than the Callisto Protocol.
Oh,
now,
wow.
Again, gamers, right, we complain about certain things, and yes, this is a remake, but for me, just like the Resident Evil 4 remake, it feels like a lovingly made one, and Dead Space 2 and 3, I barely remember now. I played, because like I said, I played those originally, 12 years ago, say, 10 to 12 years ago, and I'll come on to why I would play them rather than playing the originals, but I think it's a crying shame if they don't give the same treatment to the sequels.
Because I know it was in the pipeline, and then they said, oh, it's gonna come out and everything, and then, as you said, because of the sales, they just absolutely threw it out the airlock, and that is just such a shame. So hopefully they change their mind down the line and they say, you know what, we'll give it the respect it deserves, because 2 is very much like Mass Effect 2. It's the one I think people remember more than the first one, even though 1 has a lot of very iconic moments. And on that note, I am going to pull up one of these tables. We're going to try and get the attention of one of the waiters over there lying on the floor. And yeah, we'll be right back after these transmissions. Welcome to Chatsunami, a variety podcast that discusses topics from gaming and films to anime and general interests.
Previously on Chatsunami, we've analysed what makes a good horror game, conducted a retrospective on Pierce Brosnan's run as James Bond, and listened to us take deep dives into both the Sonic and Halo franchises.
Also, if you're an anime fan, then don't forget to check us out on our sub-series, Chatsunami, where we dive into the world of anime. So far, we've reviewed things like Death Note, Princess Mononoke, and the hit Beyblade series.
If that sounds like your cup of tea, then you can check us out on Spotify, iTunes, and all good podcast apps.
As always, stay safe,
stay awesome, and most importantly,
stay hydrated.
Fancy taking a humorous trip down a random topic each week? You do? Well, you're in luck. Casting Views, presented by me, Dan, and a host of guests, bring you just that. With topics from the world of entertainment, science, sport, and everyday life, there's bound to be a topic that's going to inform and amuse. Catch Casting Views every Sunday on all listening platforms now.
Oof, I don't know about you, but those were some spooky transmissions. Oh my god.
Yeah, we need more lighting in this place as well, Satsu.
Waiter! Waiter! Nah, he's too busy being dead. I mean, the breadsticks were taken out an hour ago. What kind of ship are they running here?
Yeah, and the cutlery leaves a lot to be desired for. Knife and forks where I'm at, not plasma rifles, all right?
Yeah, I'm just using 2 nails as chopsticks here, let's face it. So, yeah, let's jump into talking about the Dead Space remake. And as I said, jokingly and lovingly, of course, that you had recommended that I get this game. And I saw it on sale. I thought, it's not usually the game I go for, but you know what? I was fresh off the oil rig from Still Wakes the Deep, not an actual oil rig. Behave yourself. But I ended up playing it. I loved it. My partner, she was watching me play it, and every so often she would just appear and be like, oh, you playing that game? And I was like, yeah. You still on the ship? Yeah, still. Shooting necromorphs. It's still going. It was an absolutely incredible experience because, as I said in the intro, I had only played a little bit of the first game, the original 2008 version, but I never completed it. So this was technically the first time I had gone through the Dead Space world and completed it. Did you say you were the same, or did you complete the original?
I played the original trilogy, so I completed all 3. Like I said, I barely remembered 2 or 3 though. But the funny thing was, maybe early this year, if not last year, I downloaded the original Dead Space to replay it. I got about half hour in and I just couldn't, because I think it still looks a great game, but it is quite clunky. And one of the things we'll talk about, like the traversing and the loading, kind of really got to me, and I just didn't play it. However, when I started to play the remake, I just got hooked on it. So that's what I was trying to say earlier. As gamers, when they get something, it's a shame that it was looked down upon, because this is such a great experience. But yeah, no, I'd played both the original, but while it was so long ago for me to necessarily remember, playing this brought some of the beats back, but obviously the clear differences that they made in the game as well.
Oh, 100%. I honestly feel as if the presentation of this game is absolutely astounding. I don't know if you felt the same way, where you're in the, I don't want to say rescue ship, because let's face it, that shuttle crashes very, very fast. But you get the slow reveal of the USG Ishimura. Nearly said tempura there. The USG Ishimura, and it looks like, and again, I know this is very surface level analysis here, but it looks essentially like a rib cage just surrounding the bulk of the ship, and everything's all pointy and angular, and you can see from the outset it's not a welcoming ship for obvious reasons. Inside you've got the nasty gribblies running around, but on the outside this is a ship you want nothing to do with. Usually in fiction you'll see a ship that's been purposely designed to look as if it's a predator, and you're like, oh, I'm not going near that. But of course they have to go into the bowels of the ship and they have to explore its murky interior and everything, and nothing about it is welcoming.
Yeah, you could say that again.
Yeah, exactly.
But the ship is great, isn't it? It's huge. You honestly feel like you said, you're going further into the bowels of hell, because it's just so big and just ever expanding, isn't it, where you're asked to go?
The thing I love about it as well is it feels so lived in. You've got all of the luggage that's piled up and everything. You've got all of the bits and pieces, the knickknacks and whatnot. You've got workstations that have been hastily abandoned. You've got the shower rooms, which I have to say gave me a bit of a fright, but that's another thing. Not because of the showers themselves, but the thought of seeing a necromorph showering,
Yeah.
But you go in, there's the stench of death in the air, and it's absolutely incredible how they build it up once you get into the ship, and you're walking in as not a superhuman, not a soldier, nothing like that. You're going in as basically a mechanic. You're going in as Isaac Clarke, an engineer who, this time surprisingly, and it's not something I really thought of when I started playing this, but Isaac Clarke, at least until the second game, and I think they brought back the voice actor from the second and third game for him, but Isaac Clarke actually gets a voice in this game.
Yeah, and for me that's absolutely massive. I know in some RPGs, like the earlier Fallout 3, and I think New Vegas, again, your character doesn't speak, and I kind of get that because it's sprawling, but I find in games like this where there's so much characterization elsewhere in other characters that your character doesn't speak just feels really odd.
It was kind of a mixed bag, wasn't it, in that era of gaming, because some games like Call of Duty, for example, that didn't have a lot of voiced player characters. You'd have people yelling orders at you and things like that, but you wouldn't necessarily be speaking, whereas on the flip side, at this point, and again, this is something that made me feel really old when I read it, but Halo 3, as of this episode, came out 17 years ago, would you believe?
Wow.
I remember playing that game, and of course you play as the Master Chief, and he's the stereotypical space super soldier, and he has a voice. If you played Gears of War as well, they have a voice, but you're completely right, even back then, it was kind of on the cusp of, do they want to have a mute protagonist, or do they actually want to give him a voice? And obviously they did in the sequel, but I feel personally it did a lot of good for him to have a voice. I do love as well, they do something that I think a lot of games nowadays are doing, where if you've got low health or you're in like a precarious situation and you're still talking, then the inflection of the voice actor actually changes based on that.
For me, you could argue maybe they didn't give the character a voice because you're alone for a lot of it going through these things, and it's almost mirroring, maybe it's supposed to be like you, maybe if you're talking it snaps you out of that belief maybe, but again, that's great, but for me then it then breaks down when characters are talking to you and you're just like you know what I mean, you're just saying nothing, they're telling you to do all this and all hell's breaking loose, and you're like, yeah, I've got better things to do than talk,
It was very much that mentality of games back then, wasn't it? Shoot first, ask questions later. This is before you're out last and you're survive in a locker type horror games. Because I mean, you did have means to defend yourself, but before we actually get into that, a kind of brief summary of the game itself. As I said before, you play as Isaac Isaac Clarke, who is basically a space engineer, and he's been asked to, along with his team, look at the USG Ishimura and see what's wrong. Then, of course, he finds a whole bunch of aliens, he finds cultists, he finds just all around weird people and such. Yeah, it's an absolutely horrific experience, and then it all culminates into the big bombastic finale. I've got mixed opinions about that, mind you, but I will obviously get onto that when we get into it. But honestly, there's a lot to love about this game, as we kind of touched on there, the atmosphere as well. And I've got to ask, were you unnerved? See, when you were playing through this game, did you get a twinge of fear?
Yeah, I think so. As the story progresses, I think I had issues with it as it progresses. But at the start, let's go right to the beginning. Yeah, it is unnerving. And something that they do so well, and this was in the original as well, is, I'm not going to say it was the first game that did it, but pretty much no HUD. And everything was just on your character, wasn't it? So the health bar was on the back, and it just made it that much more immersive. And I think it had a really good attempt at making you feel in the mind or in that character's role. And I think, the lack of flashing lights or health bars and ammo counters all around the place really helped to solidify that.
I absolutely love the HUD in this game, or rather lack of HUD.
Yeah.
It's all incorporated into the suit, and even when you pause, it comes out of the character. I think there's a main pause menu for settings and things, but for the actual pause menu where you're looking at the map and everything, which I think was overhauled in the remake, there's quite a few changes I think they did. For example, there's a scene later on where you have to shoot asteroids down, as opposed to, I think in the original it was more like a catwalk kind of thing, and there's a lot of kind of differences there. But I honestly think this game looks absolutely gorgeous, and especially with that all integrated into the character, it is stunning. Genuinely, see if you told me that this was a brand new game and it wasn't based off of Dead Space, if you had no idea Dead Space existed in the late 2000s, you would honestly believe it, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I also loved the art style. So the armor that Isaac wears as well is just iconic now when you look at it. And the cover of the game, or at least the first game as well, which I think is just the close-up of the helmet, isn't it, with the glowing lights, or at least it was used for some of the advertising at least. It's just really, really well done. And, I don't think this game nowadays anyway gets as much love and attention as it should do. Again, I'm going to say it's such a great game. I think whilst the original, now I'm not asking you to go play the original, because I said earlier I couldn't get back into it, but you don't have to now, because this is pretty much the same experience. But, and I'm sure we'll come on to it. I chuckled a bit when you said about some of the scenes had changed, because I remember playing and was thinking, well, I thought this happened in the game. I must be thinking of a different one. And it was only when I looked after that I saw, they did fundamentally change some things, I think for the better. But I was saying to myself, am I confusing this with a completely different game now then?
Oh, it's the worst. See, when you play a remake and you're like, yeah, that's fine, I'll do this bit, I'll do that bit, and your old tactics do not work because they've completely revamped it, and you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna die.
Well, we're talking about now. So like you said, the asteroid section, which I think, like the Mako, I don't want to keep talking about Mass Effect, but like the Mako in Mass Effect, they definitely improved it. I think the original section was quite frustrating, and I was waiting for that bit and it didn't come, and that's why I specifically thought maybe I mistook it for another game, because there was a whole section, I think, where you're behind the turret gun and shooting enemies with it as well. I think there's the classic boss with glowy bits that you've got to shoot, as well as asteroids. Now in the remake, you're calibrating guns and you've literally got to shoot 2 or 3 asteroids, I think, don't you?
Yeah, it's a weird system, because I think you need to train it, or train the laser on it or something like that, and it's a pain in the backside, because we'll definitely get onto them soon, but the enemies keep jumping on you, and you've lined it perfectly, and the necromorphs are going, "Get down, Mr. President," and he's just out of nowhere, and it's like, what the hell?
Yeah. I think they even improved the zero gravity bits as well, because they felt much better.
Yeah, as far as I remember, I think they based that off of the mechanics of Dead Space 2, I want to say.
Okay.
So it was like you could rotate yourself easier, and you could launch yourself, and because I was reading that, it seems as if it's a lot more polished than what it was in the original game.
Yeah, and the only other one I remembered or recalled at the time was, and I wasn't sure then if I mistook it for a later game, but I subsequently found found out that it's not. It's the first one. In the original, there were certain locked doors that you could go into, but you needed those power nodes. You needed a certain amount of power nodes, which it was a trade-off because unless you were really good at it or you were finding them all, you had to use them either, I think, for the crafting or for the doors. But in this game, it's more security level, isn't it? I think you need to up your security level to get to those. So again, I was walking around thinking, but I need more power nodes because I know they're going to come in handy later, and that bit never happened.
That is just a gaming sin 101, isn't it? Where you hoard everything. You're like, oh, I'm going to need it later.
Yeah.
I'm going to need it later. And then the credits are rolling. You're like, I'm going to need it later.
There's always New Game Plus.
Yeah, exactly. You're completely right, though. I have to admit, I did like the security clearance aspect of it because it was always so satisfying when you walked by a box and it's like, oh, security level 3, and you only had 2, and you're looking at this box like, I don't even know how to describe it. You're just looking at it going, I'll be back for you later. You wait there, I'll be back. And then you come back with security level 3. And it was always so annoying because either you got something really useful or you got something just absolutely terrible. Oh, it's ammo for the gun that you don't use. And it's like, oh, yay.
What I want to know is how did the necromorphs get that security level? Because they're always in the rooms you were going into. So how are they getting that security clearance?
Just Bob the necromorph. You're like, oh, it's a living.
Yeah, it's doing 9 to 5. Yeah. I've been passed over for that promotion again.
Yeah, we see as a level 2, not a level 3. Yeah, I'm sorry. You just stay in this room as they lock it.
Yeah, let's talk this time next year. Let's see how you've done then.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Well, I'm glad you asked. Clearly not a necromorph. Oh, will we talk about the necromorphs? Because, oh boy, absolutely incredible. They are terrifying every time you see them. They skulk along the halls and you can hear them. They cause me to jump out of my skin a couple of times because I'm walking along, and it's, you know, that old joke of the guy turns around and goes, oh hey, and the necromorph's like, hello, and I'm like, oh my god, where did you come from? But they are just absolutely iconic, aren't they?
Yeah, and this is what I remember playing the first game originally when they did creep me out when you first see them, because they're all slightly different. Well, they are very different, sorry, but they all sort of move differently. Some shamble. I mean, the ones that really annoy me though, and they really annoy me, you know, they're small, but then they've got the 3 tentacles that come out of them because they're so often awkward to hit, aren't they? Because we'll come on to the dismemberment thing after, but that game was built around that. But the necromorphs generally, I just think are some of the, again, at the time, and I think now, some really good enemy design.
Oh, they are incredible. And they up the ante for the remake, because if you look closely at them, which I have to say, I try not to, but try to shoot them at a distance, but if I have to backslap them, then yeah, they've got pieces of armour, or rather the suits from their previous occupation. Bob, of course, has got his level 2 clearance badge hanging off of him. They definitely put a lot more effort into showing that these were real people that, of course, have horribly been mutated into these abominations. I'm sorry, spoilers, and we will be going into deeper spoilers here, but it's just absolutely crazy how they got the body horror so down. Body horror, for me personally, is one of the things that creeps me out the most when it comes to horror, because, you know, you get the ones that's over the top, it's gory, like your Dooms and things like that, and you're like, yeah, blood, this and that, but to have something that keeps you alive like a parasite and just morphs you, a bit like what they do in Resident Evil as well, where they've got the infected and they turn them into quote-unquote zombies and whatnot. Same with The Last of Us, only for Dead Space they just ramp it up to 11 and they never stop. You do get a lot of abominations, don't you?
Yeah, well, like I said, body horror is definitely there, and especially some of the crew, I think you said as you land there, some of the crew obviously turn, but a lot of them, I'm just looking at them now, you know, and the names kind of give away what they're doing, but like you got the slashers and the spitters and the lurkers and the leapers. I mean, it sounds like a band. If you're looking at the pictures, pretty much all of them have got faces or heads. Do you know what I mean? And I know that might sound stupid, but you know, we're not talking about a Resident Evil game where it's like a population has been turned by the virus. These are these grisly necromorphs, but the heads or the faces have remained, if you know what I mean. That's unnerving, isn't it?
When you play a game like, for example, Call of Duty or even Gears of War, let's say, these kind of shooter games where they purposely try to depersonalize personalise the enemies. They've all got the helmets on, they've got the same uniforms, and the aim of the game is essentially to gun down these particular creatures that they don't really have much sympathy behind them. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I'm feeling sympathetic over shooting necromorphs, believe you me, but the fact that they make them human, because I mean, look at things like Star Wars, for example, the fact that you've got all the stormtroopers that have the helmets, but then all the heroes don't wear helmets, because, well, except the Mandalorian, but that's another thing. You know, it shows that kind of, oh, look, we are humanizing the heroes versus dehumanizing the enemies that they're basically gunning down. And, you know, in your brain, you think, oh, it doesn't matter, they're bad guys. And you don't realize Bob 2.0, or cousin of Bob, has been gunned down by Luke Skywalker. But with these guys, it is, as you said, they're very humanoid, and you can still see their faces and everything. It is absolutely terrifying. And of course, the name itself comes from the combination of the word necro, which is to do with death, and the word morph, meaning to change, to evolve into something. And it's a great name. And I'm reading the trivia here. Apparently, the guy who designed them was a guy called Ben Wanat, and apologies if I butchered that name, but apparently it was his wife that came up with the name.
Oh, really?
So Mrs. Wanat, well done. Yeah. Well done for that. Because as you said, it is kind of obvious what they're going for, but it's quite disconcerting when you see something that looks like a human stumbling towards you, and you know, you don't want to shoot it initially, but when you see the big limbs bursting out of it and things, and of course, that's probably a good point to talk about the dismemberment system, which it's one of the more unique gameplay styles, isn't it?
It really is. And if I remember right, the first game originally was marketed around that it was a system you had to use. And this is going to sound so wrong, but it's quite a satisfying mechanic, isn't it? Not in a sadistic way, but in terms of a tactic.
Yeah, because usually in games like this, especially at the time, you would just have a big gribbly monster that you would just keep shooting at until it went down, or you would shoot its weak point, which, don't get me wrong, some monsters have that, for better or for worse. But yeah, the fact that you can shoot away their legs and everything, and you can shoot away their arms so that they don't attack you the same, then you go for the head to stomp on them, which I know sounds very violent, and it is. This is an 18 plus, kids, don't play it. Yeah, it's such an innovative way to, again, going back to this word of immersing yourself in the game, rather than just being a player character that you pew pew the aliens. No, you are in there. If you think, oh, this alien can get, or necromorph is going to get slowed down by losing his legs, you better believe that you're taking your plasma cutter out and taking his legs away, because otherwise you're just going to become like them.
Can I just say something before we carry on? I mean, you laugh when you say pew pew, but did you know I think it was Dead Space 2, in a New Game Plus, there was a weapon, I think, in New Game Plus mode where it was like one of those foam fingers. That was the gun, and it did make a pew pew noise when you were shooting it.
That's amazing.
But like I said, it was built around the dismemberment mechanic, and the first game you get is a plasma cutter, isn't it? Which is like 3 lines of laser, and you can rotate it, can't you? So you can have it horizontal or vertical. So, you know, you could turn it vertical to take the arms off, say, of the necromorph, or you could use it horizontal to shoot the legs off, but then it would still come crawling to you. And then, like I said, you had to tactically take them down before giving them a good old stomp.
Pretty much. You have to make sure they're dead, because the amount of them that, for some reason, they pretend they're dead, and then you stomp on them and they're like, oh, I'm not dead. It's like, oh my God. That got annoying very fast. But of course, you've got an array of weapons that I have to say I really appreciated. The fact that for the most part, other than I don't know if it's called the pulse rifle or, you know, the assault rifle that you get, I wasn't a big fan of that. That surprisingly was the only one I kind of thought, I'm not a huge fan, although I used it when I had to. You also had ones that were very much like tools rather than weapons that you were going around shooting people with, which I think technically if you were using it in a normal ninja near setting, you wouldn't be hacking off people's limbs, hopefully not.
Well, I'd be watching over my shoulder, yeah.
Well, yeah, me too. If I was working on the Ishimura, I'd be watching my back. But yeah, you've got the plasma cutter, which of course, as you said, you can rotate it horizontally or vertically to take out limbs. You've got the, I can't remember the name of it, but like the saw.
The Ripper thing. Those two were my favourite, I think. The plasma cutter, even though that was your first weapon, it just felt so satisfying to use. But the Ripper, which is like I said, it was like saw blades, which you could either shoot out or suspend it, wasn't it, with it spinning. So you're actually guiding it, aren't you?
You just held it in front of you and they just walked into it. Yeah. And you also had, I can't remember the other one, it was like a kind of force gun where it's like you had tripwires, I think, from it. It also blasted the hell out of it in front of you. But one thing, and again, this isn't something I usually like, but one thing I did think was quite clever was the fact that your ammo is very scarce in terms of you have to micromanage your inventory. So, you know, you've got your particular set of weapons that you can take all of them if you want, or you can only take a handful, because there's a flamethrower as well, isn't there?
There is, yeah. I mean, most games do, but yeah, there definitely is.
Yeah, which I have to say, why have a flamethrower when you've got a plasma cutter that's OP as hell?
Yeah, that's true. Because you can upgrade them, can't you, as well? That's the thing.
And you can make them more powerful, you can make the reload faster. It's really cleverly done, and I think there was a revamp of that as well for the skill tree. I want to say it is, I could be totally wrong on that, but yeah, you have the skill tree that you can upgrade the weapons and everything, and yeah, it's absolute, in terms of combat, it's just absolutely fantastic. That kind of leads us, I suppose, to the story of this game, because we've talked a lot about the gameplay, which was fantastic. Actually, sorry, before I go on, I just want to touch on technically three particular necromorphs that I really didn't like, bar the one at the very end. But as you said, you had the one with the 3 tentacles that came out, kept shooting you. That was a pain. The one where you had to shoot the back of it, I felt like I was in a Benny Hill skit where it was like I was running around and I couldn't get behind him. And then I realised, you're supposed to use the stasis, which is another really interesting power as well. It's not something we've touched on, where you can freeze things in place, or you can use kinesis to move things with your suit, not your mind, fortunately, just your suit. And you have to refill the meter for it. It's really well done, but you have to use that to freeze it in place. And I didn't realise that, so I was running around trying to shoot it, and then I was running out of ammo, so not my finest moment. But the final one, of course, is the super necromorph, the regeneration one. That was a pain in the bum.
I mean, that's the thing, and we've praised this, and rightly so, but there were a couple of things that did annoy me in the game, and one was, I don't know if it's that one actually, but the Leviathan, I think it was that the one where you had to go certain things, you had to deposit certain chemicals in certain places to take it down? It just felt like, you got to go here, do this here, you got to go there, do that there, and it just became so evident that it was just a random point-to-point quest.
Yeah, it was like you had to inject one person with something, then you had to inject with another.
That's it.
It almost reminded me of that level out of Bioshock, the one where, I can't remember who it is, but it's the woman who's trapped in I think it's the Arcadia Gardens, and she's like, you're not getting in here until you get me this and that, and you're like, oh, I know your game.
Are you really in a position to barter here,
Yeah, exactly. And I know they're doing it for the health of the ship and whatnot, but it was kind of cool shooting the Leviathan afterwards when it latched itself back on and you had to go outside to shoot. That was cool. And the concept of it was really fun. But the actual having to, as you said, do the busy work and go here, there and everywhere, you're like, you had a few moments like that where you had to backtrack, and some moments were better than others, I will say.
But just a quick word on that. When you say backtrack, it's so much better, and the progression in this game is so much better. It felt like one open ship, whereas originally, I remember it again because of the loading, it felt like you were definitely going into sectioned off rooms. But yeah, it's a lot better now.
Yeah, because I think technically you can go back if you want.
Yeah.
Not sure why you would want to if it didn't progress the story, but you get side missions, I think, in this. Did you get side missions in the original?
I don't believe you did, no. That's the funny thing, yeah.
Because I have to say, it was actually really interesting seeing how they built up the world through environmental storytelling, especially when you get to the big room that has the captain's quarters and basically the fancy part of the ship, as opposed to where, the plebs live and such. And you got to see that. That was absolutely fantastic. And I loved the way they did it, because it wasn't just, spooky graffiti on the walls, even though there was spooky graffiti, like they cut their limbs off. That actually leads me on to probably the final and main point of this analysis, which of course is the story. See, overall, what did you think of the story? Were you impressed, or did you kind of think, could have been better in a few places?
I'm going to be honest now. I enjoyed playing and completing the game because it was an enjoyable game to play and complete, but I did lose myself with the plot a little bit towards the end. It just felt like they threw a lot. Is it cliched? Maybe I don't mean the word cliched, but personally, this is obviously, I just felt I lost a bit of attachment to the story towards the end, although I do love the final reveal.
For me personally, and this is obviously we're going into heavy spoilers for the story here, so go away, go play it, come back, or read a Wikipedia summary.
I'll tell you all about Bob now.
We can tell you about the legend of Bob. Bob began his career... No, I'm like... Yeah, so basically, I feel sorry for Bob now. But yeah, basically, as you progress through the ship, the reason that Isaac took this job, and it's something we didn't mention at the beginning, because why would you want to go in the big murder ship in the middle of nowhere, is because his... Is it girlfriend?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not his wife, or... Not that that makes any difference, but it's the woman he loves anyway.
Yeah.
She is a doctor on the ship, and she met him because I think she worked on deprogramming a lot of people from this cult that was going on Earth called Unitology. And I think Isaac's mother was one of them, and they met through that. It seems, I have to admit, like a bit of a morbid story. Boy has mother who's in cult, boy meets girl while mother's getting deprogrammed, you know. Not going to say it at your wedding, probably, but yeah, he's searching the entire ship for her, and that's the whole driving force of him. Every so often you see Nicole, and then you actually learn that the ship you're on is supposed to be a kind of resource harvesting ship, but then what ends up happening is they bring on a particular artifact that the unitologists want, which is something called a marker, and the marker basically is the reason why they're all transforming into these horrible abominational monsters, as it were. It's interesting in one sense, but I'm totally with you. Once you get to that kind of halfway mark and you realise, oh, the necromorphs are people and everything, it kind of starts to lose its luster.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume you mean the twist with Nicole. Yeah, that she, unfortunately, I can't believe I'm having to tell you this, listeners, but she indeed does not like bread. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. I was horrified. Now, jokes aside, she has been sixth sensed the entire time. I've spoiled two properties in one there, but she has been dead the entire time. That is actually something that I think the second game brings up, and a lot of fans have brought up, that by all means, we never actually see Nicole's body, so we could have very well have killed Nicole as a necromorph, which is a depressing thought.
Could we say how the reveal was done though? Because I think at the time, I remember being, you know, it's going to sound really trivial now, but at the time, I was like, whoa, do you know what I mean? Mind blown.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Obviously, as per any game, there are levels, or now it's all one level, so it's more sections. But I just want to see if we can find it. But ultimately, at the end, when you play the final one, you realise that the first letter of every level or section spells out Nicole is dead. And it's there in front of your face, but, you know, you don't see it because you're playing the game. But here we go. So just very quickly, it's new arrivals, intensive care, course correction, obliteration imminent, lethal devotion, environment hazard, into the void, search and rescue, dead on arrival, end of days, alternate solutions, and the final chapter, dead space, all spelling out Nicole is dead. I mean, you mentioned Sixth Sense, but it is that penny drop moment when it comes up on screen, because I think it does, if I remember right, or at least in the original it did.
Because the other one that I found interesting, and I don't actually know if this was in the original game, but you know at the very end when you're with, well, it's Hammond, and I can't remember the other woman that you're with, but it turns out she is, I think she's trying to investigate, isn't she? The unitologist, and she tries to stop you.
But it's not just a hallucination, it's one of the other characters, isn't it? That it's almost like the hallucination is over, so it's not like he's just seeing a random figure. He's actually seeing someone, but then it's almost like in his mind they're making it seem to be, you know, whatever's happened to him, he's seeing her as. as Nicole.
Yeah, because he's seeing her as Nicole and the character is Cross. I think it's scientist or doctor, I can't remember, but she sees him as her love interest too. Unfortunately, he got shot in the head by in a very brutal scene actually. It's he gets stasised by one of the cult members and then he just basically fires a plasma cutter bolt into his head. It's really brutal. But yeah, they see one another as each other's respective love interests and everything, and that was a really cool reveal, because after that I knew that Nicole was dead based on all the media and the memes and things that surround this game, but I didn't see that bit coming. I was like, oh right, so Nicole technically was kind of there at times, but not who he thought.
Well, I've got it here, so I've just looked up quickly. So it says, yeah, Kendra reveals that Nicole was dead all along, having committed suicide to avoid becoming a necromorph. The Nicole Isaac was working with is actually Cross, who hallucinated Isaac as Temple, and the marker manipulated them both to return it to the hive mind. So yeah, double crossing there. But also just something to call out for the ending as well. So doesn't Isaac, I think, is in the ship, he's taking off, he's resting, and then there's that hallucination of Nicole attacking him, I think, isn't there?
Well, what's quite interesting about that, surprisingly, is do you know there's an alternate ending?
No, well, not that I've seen anyway.
Throughout the game, there's mini markers, I think they're called, or, like statues of markers, and I think if you collect them all, then you have a more cordial discussion with Nicole,
okay,
but you're clearly just absolutely mental now. You're absolutely crazy. You're talking to her being like, oh, let's spread the word of the markers. And it's like, oh no, we've messed up, guys. And it's clear you've kind of been corrupted by it, but that's the 100% run. I have to say though, and maybe this is a personal preference, but see the hive mind, you touched on it there, but see the hive mind, which is the final boss of this game. So basically the reason that you end up coming across this big behemoth is, I think one of the characters tries to insinuate, or rather one of the cultists says that you have to get the marker back down to the planet that you're circling, because that's basically how you got to that situation in the first place. Once you get it down there, you have the hallucinations and whatnot, you fight through a couple of necromorphs, and then there's this big tentacle-like monster that comes out and you're supposed to shoot it. I'm going to be honest, I did not care for that final boss battle.
No, I agree.
It almost reminded me, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but it reminded me of a boss battle from Deadly Premonition. For the three of you out there who have played Deadly Premonition, if you know, you know. But there's a scene there where you have to fight a giant version of the main villain, and you have to hit the particular weak spot. You know, like when you get pulled up by the hive mind and they've got that tiny point you're supposed to shoot, and it's really hard because you're swaying back and forth. And I know there's a lot of Dead Space fans out there going, get good, Satsu, which I believe I tried. And I got it eventually, but I was still just like, this is ridiculous. I feel as if with all the psychological horror, and it built it up fantastically in the Ishimura, I think probably, see when you come into contact with I think it's the USG Valor or something like that, you're the military ship, and that made me laugh, I have to say. I actually audibly gasped, because early on one of your crew members gets infected, gets killed and it gets infected, turns into a necromorph, and Hammond seals him in an escape pod and jettisons him out of the ship.
Yes,
You're like, never have to see that guy again. And then I was just like, oh my god, because the ship were like, it's okay, we got one of your escape pods. And I was like, no. Audibly, I was like, no. And then, of course, it's like, oh, when was that transmission? A couple of hours ago? Yeah, they're dead, aren't they? They are 100% dead. I have to say, obviously, it's safe to assume, isn't it, that we would highly recommend this game.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. And just to reiterate at the start, I know reviews aren't everything, but on Metacritic, PC it's got 87, PS5 and Xbox it's 89. Destructoid, I'm looking here, 8.5 out of 10. Game Informer, 9 out of 10. Game Revolution, 8 out of 10. GameSpot, 9 out of 10. Games Radar, 4.5 out of 5. IGN, 9 out of 10. NME, 4 out of 5. Telegraph, 4 out of 5. Guardian 4 out of 5. It's a great game. I'm so disappointed that it's not going to get the sequels remade. I mean, we've said about the things we didn't like, but the game is just so enjoyable. Absolutely go play it.
I mean, it really is, because despite one or two flaws of it, that is essentially us nitpicking, I suppose, because don't get me wrong, there are faults with this game as a whole, because let's face it, no game is perfect, but in terms of a horror experience, like a horror action experience that you are going to remember, that is visually stunning, has overhauled things in all the right places, because what made me laugh was when you and I and Luke and Marie from the PodPack Collective, we were doing the Mass Effect month a couple of months ago, and Marie was very annoyed at the Legendary Edition because other than a few minor tweaks, they didn't really overhaul it massively, at least graphically, that is. But as I said, this game is a completely different game. This genuinely can stand on its own as Dead Space, the reboot, or whatever. It is such an incredible achievement that they have managed to pull off here, both visually, both the upgrades in gameplay itself. It doesn't feel as clunky. As you said, they've managed to connect the ship together. It makes the environmental storytelling pop out all the more. You want to do the side missions, you want to try and learn more about this ship, you want to immerse yourself in this world, and I don't mean that in a positive way, but you want to know what happened to this ship. You want to know who the unitologists are, what they did. There's hundreds of lore tidbits, audio logs, regular text logs as well, talking about the eventual changes of the crew members of the ship and them trying to hide themselves away and everything. And it's amazing that in 2023 we managed to actually get, so it would have been, what, 15 years later?
Yeah, 15, 16 years from the original, yeah.
Yeah, that we've got this remake, and it turned out in all the best ways. It turned out incredible. Everybody's praising it, as you were saying there. I totally agree, because I've only played a small amount of Dead Space 2, and it's funny because I remember I played it in stream with my very good friend and co-host Andrew, but unfortunately he was watching it through me streaming it on a Discord stream,
Oh,
but
right.
he couldn't hear it, so he could only see what I was doing, so he could comment along as I was streaming it on Twitch. So I was getting jump scared, the monsters and necromorphs would jump out and go, "Arr," and I would be going, "Ah," and he would be talking, going, "So anyway, about my day," kind of thing. And it was terrifying. I was like, no, never again. But from what I played of that was absolutely incredible. So the fact that we could have had something akin to this remake, but in Dead Space 2, absolutely, it is a tragic loss. And I hope to God that they see the errors of their ways and they just say, you know what, we made a mistake, let's just try it again.
Or at least they see this episode, hear this episode, and change their mind.
Yeah, EA, if you want to sponsor us,
Yeah.
you know where to find us. Throw some EA money our way. But in summary, absolutely fantastic game. And if you're looking for a horror game this Halloween, definitely go check it out, because as of this episode, you still have a couple of days left until Halloween. So definitely pick yourself up a copy.
And it's on Game Pass, right?
I think it is. I think you're
Pretty
right.
certain
Yeah.
it is, yeah.
First of all, Dan, thank you for peer pressuring me into playing this game.
No problem. You've got a list already I've given you, right?
Do you know, someone actually brought up one of the games you recommended to me.
Oh, really?
It was Jess from Opinionated Lushes. She came on to do the Firewatch review with me, and I was like, oh, you should come on and review another indie game. And she was like, oh, have you heard of a game called Road 96?
Oh, yes.
In the back of my mind, I heard your voice going, Road 96.
And the funny thing is, that's not even one I can remember, so I've given you a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I've got tons on Steam. I've got hundreds to keep me going. That will definitely be an episode for the next couple of months. I'll keep us busy. But honestly, Dan, once again, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me in this spectacular episode.
No, thank you again for having me on for it. And yeah, I'm choosing a restaurant next time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So no tempura for us tonight. But as we go away and look for an alternative restaurant, where can these lovely lovely listeners find your content?
Yeah, just look for casting views across all the podcast players. And yeah, social media, if you fancy interacting with me on social media, again, just look for casting views on most of them, but more active on Twitter/X now and Instagram.
And if you want to check out more episodes from ourselves, you of course can check us out on our website, chatsunami.com, as well as all good podcast providers. I also want to thank our amazing Pandalorian patrons, Robotic Battles hosted in Sonia. Thank you so much as always for supporting the show. And if you would like some juicy bonus content such as early access, exclusive content, full-length commentary tracks and the like, honestly, go check it out over at patreon.com/Chatsunami. But as you might have seen on the corner of the thumbnail, this podcast is of course a part of the PodPack Collective. We both are. So if you want to check us out on social media, you can check us out on Twitter/X at PodPack Collect, and of course on Instagram at PodPack Collective. So Dan, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure recording this with you. As always, stay safe, stay awesome, and most importantly, please don't eat at the Ishimura. As Dan said, find another restaurant, please, for the love of God. Stay spooky, Pandalorians.